Hello.
Hello, good to meet you.
Likewise. How you doing?
I'm well, thanks. And yourself?
Quite good. I love your setup.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this is at my mum and dad's house, so I have all my books here.
Hmm. Well, tell me about yourself.
I am currently a trainee accountant, but I'm primarily interested in libertarian theory and writing about moral and political philosophy,
Hmm. All
and
right.
have
Are
been
you uh,
since.
are you an independent writer as well?
Well, what do you mean by that?
I saw that you appeared on television. Was it GB News?
That's right. I write for various UK sort of second-rate websites such as the Critic or Conservative Home, and if GB News wants somebody to say something controversial on a given topic, then they'll phone me up sometimes.
I see.
Mm.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, I enjoy it.
And do you have a Substack where people can find your writing as well?
Yes, themusingindividualist.substack.com.
All right. Well, I think we were going to we were going to discuss the ethics of annexing land under libertarianism.
Yes.
And we'll get to it eventually. I specifically want to discuss America's hopefully upcoming annexation of Greenland.
Yeah.
So this is a subject I've been thinking about a lot, actually. I'm working on a Substack post now, which I'm going to call "Whose Land Is It?" about the what a libertarian should think about annexation. So obviously, as libertarians, we think that property rights to land are real. Some people really own things. And most of the time it's clear. Like I think pretty much every individual legitimately owns their house. I think that people of China own China, but there are cases where it is disputed, like with Israel and Palestine. There are some that's a polarizing issue for libertarians because some libertarians think that the Palestinians are the rightful owners and they're being forced out of their land, and some libertarians think that the Israelis legitimately own at least some of the land. So I think um, there are a few principles that we could elaborate on. I think that homesteading uninhabited land is a legitimate way of acquiring a property right to that land. Would you agree with that?
100%.
So if there's a gigantic open plain and you go and you build a log cabin and start a farm, I think you own the farm. Another thing that I think is that probably in most cases, if people have been using land for a long time, they own it.
I'm less sure about the second instance because they might have occupied the land of people that have had it stolen off them.
True.
But I'm sympathetic to the claim that a long period of use where nobody else has counterclaimed that land grants them title to it.
Almost every piece of land on Earth has been stolen from somebody at some point. So I think
Yeah,
unless you're going to, really going back and trying to locate the descendants of the original legitimate owners of every piece of land would be a huge project. It would be much more disruptive than communism.
well, I'm not too sure about that because you can adopt the idea that an individual landowner is innocent until proved sort of guilty. And it's upon the people who want to challenge his title to do so. And given the difficulties of doing that, most titles would remain with their current holders, although there would be some instances where it's very clear that the land has been stolen and it should be returned to its rightful owners. I'm sure that's the case for some land
Yeah,
who
but
are
if
being
so,
tried.
you're saying the system could be that if someone can prove that the land was stolen from their great grandfather, they can get it back.
Yeah,
The problem I have with that is that seems to punish societies that keep good records. It seems like
it does
developed
do that.
countries have good records of history, so they're going to be totally, um, like you see with a lot of anti-colonial discourse, non-Western countries will steal stuff and then it will be stolen from them later, and then they demand it back. Like
Yeah.
Turkey stole ancient statues from Italy and or even ancient Romans a long time ago, and then those statues were later stolen by the British Museum, and then Turkey demands the statue back. So it seems like if a society keeps good records, then the enemies of that society can come and exploit their sense of fairness by demanding all their property back, while the primitive society that doesn't keep good records never has to give anything back. That sounds like a problem to me.
I don't think that is a problem. I think the worst incentive that it creates is in the future, it encourages societies, or rather individuals, who do steal land to burn all of the records and make sure none of them are created to ensure that we can rectify justice in the future. I
Mhm.
don't have an issue with what you've pointed out, because I don't think there's any great problem with an inequality of rectification. That's not the problem per se. The problem per se is that some rectification hasn't gone on that should go on. The inequality is not an issue at all. Certainly, if you're a libertarian, you shouldn't think, "Oh, well, there's an inequality in the rectification. There's something wrong there." No, if
Right,
you're a
but
libertarian,
I am disturbed by it sounds like the result would be the gradual destruction of civilized places by barbarians. If the barbarians can steal things and then keep them, and the civilized people always have to give back whatever they steal, it seems like the end result is the barbarians end up owning everything.
maybe, but libertarianism isn't about preserving civilization. Sometimes it will require the restoration of
I'm not so
barbarianism.
sure.
But I would note that certainly in the USA, if I understand rightly, a lot of the land claims that Indians make aren't legitimate claims because they haven't, or they didn't rather, properly homestead the land. And there's also the whole problem that they stole from each other. But they conveniently ignore that when it
Right,
comes to claiming it back from the white people.
exactly.
And exactly the same argument can be made against transatlantic slavery. You never hear the people that were in favor of slave reparations go on about Africans in Africa that sold their ancestors to European slavers. And the basic
Yeah,
reason for
they
that
never
is
demand that
they've got no money over there, but the Americans have got lots of money. So we'll go after the people with the money,
they
which
never demand
really,
that Dakar pay reparations to American slaves.
well, absolutely. And that
So that
shows
brings
that
me to my third point. I think that nomads do not own all of the land that they range over because they're not really using it. I think that in order to have a claim to land, if you homestead the land, you have to actually use it, or it doesn't count as a homestead. You can't just put your flag there.
I agree. I think the Native Americans who ran buffalo over the Great Plains or did hunting over the area simply have the hunting rights, and you couldn't stop them
Hmm.
from hunting over it. But if somebody created agriculture in those Great Plains, then they couldn't be stopped by the Indians. They would just have to accept the agriculturalists that a number of their crops would be trampled, which is fine because the hunting rights were there first.
Well, but that would make it basically impossible to have a farm if your crops can be trampled.
I don't I don't think so. It would just mean the farm has lower productivity, or you could plant, say, apple trees. Although apple trees might get in the way of the hunting rights, I think you could just plant corn, but accept the fact that a lot of it is going to be stamped.
Hmm.
Or
Well,
maybe
I have more.
you could farm sheep or cows or something like that. I mean, that's not going to interfere in the hunting, as long as it doesn't interfere in the hunting. Billy Christmas has got a good, or an interesting theory at least,
Well, but
of
wait a minute. If you use up some of the grazing land for your own grazing animals, that will slightly reduce the carrying capacity of bison on the land.
yes, that's right. Maybe you couldn't do that then. This is a complicated question, and I'm not going to pretend to know the answer as to how libertarians establish their homesteading theory, which is rather a shame given how essential it is. But the basic intuitions about if you use something, you have a right to it are there. And I think it does exist in the case of hunting. I don't think you can exclude all of the people that are hunting over the Great Plains simply because you've ploughed the land there. I think they do have They have some use rights over that area.
I agree. Well, I think that we could think about the minimal principle and the maximal principle of what counts as use. I suppose the maximal one would be that any land that you lay eyes on during your lifetime is counts as land that you're using.
Yeah.
Now, even by that definition, uh, like native people in Alaska were not using most of Alaska.
Hmm.
I don't think they were personally surveying the entire territory of Alaska within one human lifetime.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of truly empty land that would be available for settlement.
Hmm.
So that's the maximum principle. The minimal principle would probably be like you actually have to have crops planted there in order to count as using it, or maybe you have to be like using it on a daily or weekly or at least somewhat regular basis to count as using it. And by that principle, nearly all of the Great Plain, by that principle, nearly all of North America was unused by natives. So nearly all of it would be legitimate uninhabited land for homesteaders.
Hmm.
And
And
then
I would err to the minimal view.
you adhere to the minimal view.
I would err to the minimal view. Yeah.
Okay. But it seems in that case, though, that they actually don't own most of their hunting grounds.
When I say err to the minimal view,
Yeah. Okay.
I mean I'm sort of leaning in that direction compared to the other one. So I still think they have the hunting rights, which I think is approximating the agricultural use that you speak about. It's
Hmm.
certainly closer to the agricultural use than simply laying eyes on an area. The Christopher Columbus theory, which I think is obviously wrong, especially given that creates income
Well,
possibilities.
Columbus thought that he owned the entire New World because
Yeah,
he planted one flag in Hispaniola. So
yeah,
that's an even more maximal position.
yeah, which is just ridiculous, and it faces the problem, certainly if you're just looking out over an area or planting a flag, of the rights clashing, because there's no clear way to determine why one flag planted in one area and another flag planted in another area sort of split at a certain point.
Right. It does seem though that the hunter-gatherers range over a very large area, which is to say that land used by hunter-gatherers has a very low population density because the people have to range over a huge area to get enough food.
Yeah.
So that's not quite as maximal as all the land that they see in their lifetime, but it is a very light form of use of the land.
Yes, it is. Um, I just feel very uneasy with the idea that you could exclude these tribes from the land that they've occupied for hundreds of years simply because you've come along with a plow.
Hmm.
I don't buy that. And I don't think, to be quite honest, I'm looking at the second treatise of government now, that John Locke would fully embrace that, because he does talk about the turf that my horse has bit as counting as homesteading. And if that's the case, if you've got a bison that you've in some way tamed and it goes bite some grass, then
Well,
actually,
they weren't taming bison though; they were hunting the bison.
yeah, it's a good point. But maybe beavers or something like that. I'm sure there's some animals that were tamed by them such that they could claim something on John Locke's theory of homesteading, or a certain interpretation of John Locke's theory of homesteading. But what do you want to say about Greenland? Because I think this
Well,
is
so
particularly
with
interesting.
Greenland, the vast majority is of the continent, not the well, almost the size of the continent. The vast majority of the island is not inhabited by anyone. So, and there are not even people visiting it. So, even on the maximal principle of people owning all the land they lay eyes on in their lifetime, the vast majority of Greenland is not owned by the people in the Greenlander villages, which are all on the coast.
Yeah.
And also, the population of Greenland is only 50,000. So I work in the town of Alexandria, Virginia, which has 250,000 people. That town which is like a suburb of DC, has 5 times as many people as the entire subcontinent of Greenland. So the vast majority of Greenland would count as uninhabited land that is legitimate for homesteaders to acquire.
Yep. I buy that.
And I also think that governments are basically just mafias. I don't really think that a government legitimately owns land. I think that people legitimately own the land. Now, there is a caveat. I think that people can legitimately own a government. Like, I think that if Um, if Sam goes around and robs people at gunpoint and then he uses the money to build a ranch for himself, I think that the people who he robbed are the legitimate owners of the ranch.
Yep.
And similarly, the federal government in America has a lot of federal buildings which are worth a lot of money. I think that the American taxpayers are the legitimate owners of those federal buildings. So it would not be it would be unjust to give away those federal buildings to some oligarch in China or someone else. It's the government does not have the right to dispose of its property in any way it sees fit because it's really the taxpayers who are the rightful owners of that property.
Yes, I agree with that.
But with for example, in Alaska, there's still a homesteading law. The population, there's so much empty space that you're technically still allowed to go into northern Alaska, and if you want to build a cabin and live in the freezing cold, you can acquire land that way. But most people don't want to do that.
That's great news.
Yes, but I think that I don't think that the American government has a legitimate claim on that land, and I don't even think the American taxpayers have a legitimate claim on that land.
Yep.
So I'm very opposed to illegal immigration because I think it's stealing things that rightfully belong to Americans. You disagree?
Yeah, I disagree. I disagree totally. You interviewed Peter Brooks recently, and
Hmm.
he and I had a debate about this. I assume you've read Hans Hermann Hoppe, or Hans Hermann Hopper.
I have heard of him, but I have not read him.
Okay, well, he basically adopts the same point of view that I imagine you do, which is given the government is stolen from the taxpayers and the government therefore does not rightly own any of its property but should act as a trustee of the property that it's stolen, then it should enact the immigration policy that the taxpayers who have been stolen from would want, and that's a restricted immigration policy. And so by allowing open borders or more open borders than the people want, the sort of state property that is used to enable immigrants into the country is improperly used, misused, and as a
Mhm.
result, the state to right the wrong, in the absence of returning all the stolen property to the stolen from people, should exclude the immigrants and implement the immigration policy that the vast majority of people want. Is that your kind of position?
Yes, and I would add on to it that it's not merely that they're using state property. That's one part of it, but also the vast majority of immigrants are coming for the purpose of collaborating with the state. They want to use government services, and they also want to use small business loans, and they vote, which is the voting is the most important part. So they're not just coming in to be bystanders; they're coming in to join the gang that is stealing from the people. Like if you imagine,
It's just
have you read Michael Humer on Starving Marvin, the immigrant?
yeah, yeah.
So Michael Humer's story is that there's this guy Marvin who doesn't have any food and he wants to go to the market to buy food. But as he's on his way to the market, he's stopped by a man named Sam. And Sam has a gun and he forces Marvin to go home and not get to the market. So Marvin starves and he dies.
Hmm.
So Sam's action is murder in this case. But I think with immigration, it's a different situation. It's more like Samantha is the leader of a gang who's constantly raiding and stealing from people, and there are these other people who are coming in and they want to join Samantha's gang, and they're coming in with the intention of joining Samantha's gang, and they would not want to come here if they didn't have the opportunity to become a gang member in the service of Samantha. And on that case, it's very obviously justified to stop them from joining. They are they are enemy combatants who are coming in to join an organization that violates property rights.
Do you favor internal migration controls within USA stopping Democrats moving to Republican areas, and in particular, stopping poor Democrats moving to rich Republican areas? Because, of course, those poor
Yes, I do.
Democrats that are natives, they want to join the government in the Republican area, which is stealing from the rich Republicans. And by exactly the same logic that you apply to foreigners, you should apply to natives too, and have internal border controls. Would you favour those?
I do support that. I just think it's less politically feasible.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. So you bite the bullet on that. I used that against Peter, and he was saying that that doesn't follow at all. And he tried to give me a whole set of reasons as to why it doesn't. But okay, would you stop people from having children then, who are going to be a drain on the state?
Well, I mean I would maybe I would prefer not to have any state welfare at all. And I think if I were a Victorian gentleman who was like in charge of distributing aid to widows and orphans, I would sternly uh, admonish people to not have children if they could not support them. I think that's a old-timey ethic, which was a good thing.
Yeah,
Now,
that's
as
interesting.
far
The
as
question as to whether or not you would prohibit people from having children who are going to be a drain on the welfare state.
so we're saying that currently today we don't immediately have the option to abolish the welfare state. So given that it exists, should the poorest people be prohibited from having children? I don't know. I mean, I think this is an issue with trade-offs. On the one hand, I do think that it's bad to have children that you can't support. I think people should not do that. And it is because it's very irresponsible. It's not responsible parenting, and it is an act of aggression against the taxpayers. Now, on the other hand, because it's become a state system, now the admonishment to people to not have children, that becomes like a state order rather than just a social pressure.
Hmm.
And I understand why people are very hesitant to endorse a state policy which attaches a requirement to not have children to the receipt of welfare. I would still probably support it. I mean, in the 90s, I think Newt Gingrich, who was the Speaker of the House, said that he
Sorry, you
would.
would support what?
I I would have to hear the details, but I'm certainly open to the idea that people who are receiving welfare on a permanent basis should not be allowed to have children.
Okay. As a
Newt
condition
Gingrich
of
during
accepting welfare?
what's that?
As a condition of accepting welfare, perhaps?
Yes, as a condition of
Okay.
accepting welfare.
I, I, I might actually even be open to that, but that's
Newt
a
Gingrich in the
distinct from.
90s said that he was the Speaker of the House in the 90s. He said that he wanted people who receive welfare to have to send their children to some kind of boarding house as a condition of receiving welfare. That got a lot of backlash and did not come to pass. But it's
Well, here in Britain, in the Victorian age, we had the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834, and that required anybody that was accepting welfare from the state to accept it in the workhouse, where they would be required to do all sorts of manual labour, such as
I
undoing
think that's a
oats
great
and
idea.
breaking stone. I'd bring it back if the choice was between the modern welfare state today or that. Obviously, I'd want to abolish the welfare state if I were in charge, but that
Right.
unfortunately is not politically possible at the moment. And neither, to be quite honest, is reintroducing the workhouse, but it's closer.
Right. Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to those old Victorian ways of doing things. I think they had it right.
Yeah. So do I. I still feel very uncomfortable with this idea, though, that you can restrict the freedom of people because they may in some way be net recipients of welfare from the state, and that the majority can put conditions on the receipt of. Actually, no, I don't have an issue with conditions on the receipt of welfare, but just as a result of you receiving net welfare, that your freedom could possibly be limited. Um, I mean, could you stop people from moving about on public roads as a result of them being net recipients of welfare? I would want to say no. That's a step too far. In
Well, if
large
they
part
can't
because
go out on
they're.
public roads, they would like starve. So I think that might be uh I would not want them to be prohibited from being on public roads.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's good because I think a lot of the Hoppian case for and Peter's case for restricting immigration does get to we should stop people that are net recipients of welfare from going on public roads. But it seems that you're not saying that because it's just attached the conditions that you're mentioning to the actual receipt of welfare. Okay.
Another idea is like the Walmart Corporation is owned by many Walmart shareholders. And you as an individual are not free to go and sleep overnight at Walmart.
No.
Uh, and even if you're like the regional manager, you're not free to invite a bunch of homeless people to sleep in your store overnight because the store is the property of the shareholders. And similarly, I think that a lot of the property of the American government is the legitimate property of American taxpayers who basically have the same kind of ownership right that a Walmart shareholder has in Walmart. And there are some acts which would by themselves be legitimate, like moving to a new place, but they unfortunately right now they always come along with the right to vote in American elections and the right to access American services. And since there's no way to separate the right to move somewhere with the right to vote, you don't have a right to allow someone to move into America and therefore have the right to vote, even if you personally want to do it, because the other shareholders,
Okay.
it's a violation of the
Doesn't
right to the other shareholders.
doesn't this get you to the conclusion though that you should oppose all legal immigration into the United
Yes,
States, but illegal migration's fine because those people can't receive welfare and they can't vote because
but
they're
they do
illegal
receive welfare. I
immigrants.
mean, they have
So
children
allow
who
for
receive
illegal
welfare.
immigration.
What's that?
Allow for illegal immigration because there's none of the objections that you've just raised to them, and then
But,
oppose legal migration.
illegal immigrants have children who will vote and will receive welfare.
Well, you
If there
certainly
were,
can't be. You can't certainly can't be against the immigration of sterile immigrants into the population.
this is a good point. Yeah, if there were some if there were some country entirely of sterile people and they were sneaking across the border into America to work manual labor jobs, I probably would not have a problem with that.
Yeah, you wouldn't have a problem with lots of gay immigrants coming to the USA either, would you?
We're assuming they're illegal immigrants, so they will never vote. Then
Yeah,
no,
legal
I don't
gay
think that would have
immigrants.
illegal gay immigrants.
Yeah, you wouldn't have a problem with them coming to the United
If
States.
they're not voting and they're not having any children and they're not using any welfare, then no, I would not have a problem with that.
Okay, and can't a lot of these problems or these objections that you make to
No,
immigration be
I do want to
solved?
say I think that there would be some people who would say they should be kept out, and those people are also shareholders in American roads and American schools and other services. So I think there is a case for keeping those people out, but I think that the consequences are so minor, I personally would not want to keep them
But,
out.
okay, you've made the point about the roads, but you've said when it comes to natives, the net recipients of welfare, they can't be excluded from the roads
But I thought
because they
with
have some kind of public right of way.
but I thought that with the situation with cutting people off who are already living here, I thought the idea was that they would be trapped in their house and then they would like starve to death because they can't leave their house. So I'm
Well,
against doing that. That's very different from telling if they live somewhere far away and telling them, no, you can't come over here. We're using our own roads. You're not welcome here. I think you're allowed to do that.
okay,
Similarly, I think suppose that somebody built a toll road which went right by suppose the only road that goes by my house is a toll road.
yeah.
I think it's fine to have toll roads in general. Now, do I think it's fine to raise the toll to $1 million so I can't leave my house without paying $1 million? I'm not sure about that. That seems suspicious.
But I think if a libertarian embraces rights of way over America, and I think a lot of libertarians, almost all of the ones that I can think of, do embrace the idea of rights of way over land, then immigrants can come along those rights of way, and provided they don't vote and they don't claim welfare, and the mere fact that they might do those isn't reason enough to stop them overall, especially if they say, I won't do that, then I don't think you can exclude them on the grounds that they're sort of intruding upon public property because we've admitted that there are rights of way into the United States there.
But I'm
And
not sure I do agree that there are rights of way into the United States. And so another issue, though, is that it's just not the case that most immigrants want to keep to themselves because they want to use public services like schools and roads. They also want to vote. And a lot of immigration is only possible because of civil rights law. It is illegal to say we only want to have, it's illegal to have a white community and white neighborhoods and white businesses and white schools. I believe it's illegal to have only native born businesses and schools and roads as well. I would have to check the details of civil rights law there.
it seems that you're justifying violating the immigrants' rights, though, on the basis that the natives' rights are already violated, and there'll be a greater violation of rights
Yes.
overall if we allow for the immigrants. But libertarianism,
Samantha is already aggressing against the neighbors, and the immigrants will aid in a further violation of rights against the neighbors.
but the immigrants aren't. You're making them out to be sort of fellow gang members. They're not. They're just voters. They're just like ordinary American citizens, but from another side of a border.
No, I think most of them are more like the gang members.
Well, certainly not the Republican ones, maybe the Democrat ones, and the ones that are leftists are like the gang members. Although I don't even know if sort of voters are like the gang members at all. I mean, they're certainly supporting the gang members, the government.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to exclude if you're going to exclude immigrants
For
on the
example,
basis,
would you deny that most immigrants are ethnic identitarians in some way?
um, I don't know, but I think they are more ethnic identitarian than the typical American.
Right, and they're identitarians of a different ethnic tribe.
Yes, yes. But I think we should judge everybody on their individual merits and demerits.
I'm
And
not
I
sure
think,
that's true. Suppose you're the Walmart owner again, and a guy with a shaved head and like a bunch of weird face tattoos comes up. Do you think that you should deny him entry to the Walmart?
um, yes, I do. I do. And I think the Walmart instance is very clear because the Walmart owner has a right to the Walmart store. But this is what I'm disputing. I don't think the US government has a right to America such that it can, or the US taxpayer does, such that it can exclude immigrants because there are rights of way into the United States. And the fact that some of those immigrants might vote for
Why would there be
politicians who
rights of way
violate
into?
rights.
Well, wait. Even if we agree that there are rights of way into the United States,
Yeah.
I still don't think it's. I still don't think that justifies him. I'm not. I don't think there are such rights of way, but I also don't think they would justify immigration to the United States. So what I was saying, I think we started talking about this originally. I was about to say, if there were illegal immigrants who were sneaking into America and then going up to northern Alaska and building log cabins there, I think that would be. I think they would be within their rights to do that. I don't think that would be an injustice. Now, as an American and as a white man, I would prefer that my own people were taking use of that land, but if we're not, then other people can. That's their right.
Yeah.
But that's not what most immigrants are doing. They want to come in and basically take advantage uh, of unjust privileges that they're getting at the expense of natives.
Sure. But the fact that some of them support thieving from the American taxpayer does not mean that those ones who do not should have their right to move into the United States violated. And a
What
number of
percentage
the
do you
illegal
think are
immigrants don't.
what percentage of immigrants do you think are libertarians?
Well, very few. You know that I think there are very few libertarian elite immigrants, but certainly the illegal immigrants, and there's a great number of those, as I understand it, they're not really creating any of the problems that you speak of. And I don't think you can restrict their freedom on the basis of, oh, yes, but they're going to create children in the future who are going to vote for these terrible policies. I mean, we don't stop people moving from one state to another on the basis of, oh, if we allow this Democrat to move into Texas, then there's a very good chance, even if they can't vote today, that they'll have a child who will vote Democrat tomorrow. And as a result of that potentiality, we can stop them from moving into Texas. Given that we're not going to do that, we're not going to allow the US government to impose those internal migration controls. I don't think the US government should impose migration controls on foreigners either. But I will add, just as a note on this whole discussion, that I'm not happy with the whole idea of open borders. I support open borders, but I don't look forward to seeing East Grinstead overwhelmed by people from the third world. It's not something I welcome.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't mention that too often because that has hindered my employment prospects in the past.
Oh, I
So
see. Well, I
I
don't
could.
want to get you into trouble.
Sorry?
I don't want to get you into trouble.
No, no. Well, it's already happened. I defended HOP's private covenant communities in the past, and a number of employers, when I tried to apply to them, said, no, we don't want you. And I'm pretty sure, for political reasons, and I'm pretty sure
Was it writing jobs or regular jobs?
regular jobs.
Okay.
So not even
Okay.
restricted to the world of ideas.
Hold on a second. I'm trying to see if I can extend our Zoom timeline. Give me a minute.
I've got to say, I've been looking through a number of your Substack articles, which I've been aware of for at least the last couple of months, and you've got some really good ones there.
Oh, thank you.
I enjoyed the one on meaning and animals, the natural law one, and the gang rape one most recently.
Yes, my objection to utilitarianism.
Yes, yes, yes. I once overheard somebody at a think tank in the UK say, well, utilitarian justifies gang rape and we should be against utilitarianism in part for that reason. And I was repeating this to a fellow intern whilst I was there. And I say, oh, well, utilitarian's totally unacceptable because, it justifies gang rape. We can't have that. And some female intern overheard this, burst into tears, and ran off for whatever reason, probably an unpleasant reason. And myself and this fellow intern really did get told off for talking about gang rape at work. So I won't be doing that again anytime in the near future because it can obviously trigger some people.
Yes, I think I said there, utilitarianism says it's okay to hurt one person if many people enjoy it. And with stealing, many people are willing to bite the bullet and say, yeah, if a bunch of people steal from a rich person and it increases the total sum of happiness, then it's okay.
Yeah.
With murder, it's just not really plausible that most people don't really enjoy. Most people are not sadists, so I don't think that the murder example is very plausible. But with gang rape, it is this real life scenario which utilitarians would seem to have to approve, which seems obviously wrong. So that's a counterexample to utilitarianism.
Yeah, I'm totally against utilitarianism, as you might imagine. But I have enjoyed talking with Bentham's Bulldog because he's at Oxford at the moment. And he and a number of others at the Socratic Society that I go to on a side Friday make some very good arguments on its behalf. It can't be dismissed as quickly as I thought it previously could.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the more, it's a seriously thought out moral theory. I think it's the biggest competitor to libertarianism. But you and I would be able to articulate why libertarianism is right and utilitarianism is wrong.
We would, but I'm not too sure if we'd be able to do it against very clever utilitarians because utilitarianism has the great virtue of being very, very coherent. And for every counterexample you can raise against it, there's very often, I wouldn't say always, a counterexample that they can raise against your theory. Although some of the counterexamples that they raise are really silly, such as, well, deontology and libertarianism in particular allows for 1 million people to suffer so one person doesn't have their penny stolen off them. And I think, yeah, it's a good counterexample against libertarianism, but pretty much the same example can be put against utilitarianism. You'll torture 1 million people provided 1 trillion people get a penny's worth of enjoyment out of it.
Right.
I mean, they're still going to say, oh, yeah, but it's 1 trillion people getting a penny of pleasure out of it, and that outweighs the million that are tortured. And I'm going to go, yeah, no, that doesn't work because the traction you're getting from the counterexample against the libertarian is that 1 million people undergoing torture is really, really bad. So that, I think, applies against the utilitarian too. And the mere fact that there's
so.
one penny of pleasure over 1 trillion people is certainly not enough reason to say, oh, well, that outweighs it or that makes it more plausible. Of course, it outweighs it in the pleasure plane idea, but it doesn't make it more plausible or plausible.
We're actually about to get kicked out of Zoom. I need to set up a new meeting, and I will send you the link in a minute.
Okay, I'll see you there.
Thank you, sir. Hello again. Okay, we're back. We were talking about immigrants going to Alaska and becoming homesteaders, which I think would be fine, although I'm against immigration under normal circumstances.
Yeah.
And so getting back to the libertarian principles behind land ownership, clearly if there's an area that no one's been to before, you can build a homestead there and homestead it. What do you think if suppose there's a very large river, a gigantic river, and there's a very tiny number of people living at the mouth of the river, and they catch some of the fish. Do you think it's okay for you to set up your fishery upstream and catch some of the fish?
provided that the people at the mouth of the river get the same number or can get the same number of fish out of the bottom.
But
Although I'm not
that would
sure.
mean never. Like it, if you take out 1% of the fish upstream, it's going to be very slightly harder for them to take out the same number of fish at the bottom.
Uh,
If the standard is that it can't have any impact on them at all, then that means that they basically have the right to the whole river and all of the fish.
well, not necessarily, because you could simply release some of the fish that you're farming into the river such that it would be just as easy for them to get the same amount of fish out.
Well, I'm not talking about farming fish. I'm saying that you're catching the fish.
Well, perhaps you'd need to farm some fish and then release some in. Again, I'm not too sure about
Mhm.
this, but I like the idea that if you've been fishing in a pond for quite a while, you get some kind of right to the fish. Certainly, if you want to sustain fish populations, you've got to adopt that view, because if it's simply you've taken out a fish and you own that fish and that's it, then you're going to very quickly find that the tragedy of the commons is built into libertarianism,
Mhm.
which is not a conclusion I want to reach. Although, if I did reach it because I've got a theory of homesteading that's really good in other cases, then I'd be willing to bite that bullet.
I was thinking of the fish in the river example to be analogous to a very large piece of land which some hunter-gatherers are using, but they're using in a very non-intensive way. And other people could use it in a more efficient way. And if they gave their more efficient technology to the first people, those people could acquire just as much, but on a smaller area of land.
Uh, so, are you trying to say that, given what I've said about the fishermen at the mouth of the river and that possibly stopping those at the upstream from ever doing anything, that's going to be the case for the hunter gatherers over a large tract of land and the people with agricultural methods from ever doing anything, because it's going to affect them in a certain way?
Right. Or to take
If
an even
that,
more extreme example,
yeah,
what if you went to the moon and started a moon tour business? And suppose that you just had like a moon buggy and you take people on tours around the moon. It could be the case that you like drive over the whole area. So you see every part of
yeah.
the moon at least once in your life. Does that mean no one else can go to the moon and build something there because you're
Uh,
technically using every part of it?
yeah, I don't think so, but I'm not going to pretend to know the answers to these difficult questions of homestead theory and libertarianism.
Hmm.
Billy Christmas, in his book Property and Justice, has got some answers, and I'm partly inspired by them. But when you give all of these examples, it makes me think maybe labor mixing isn't actually too bad an idea, and we should just go back to that because it avoids all of these problems that you speak about. And
But
sure,
with
some
labor mixing, there's still the question of
labor do
how
you
much
need to
labor and
use?
how much stuff. Like I think Nozick said in Anarchy State and Utopia, if if an astronaut mixes some of his labor with the moon, does he own just that tiny part of the moon? Does he own the whole moon? Does he own the whole uninhabited universe?
He owns the bit that he's ploughed. So if he's ploughed an acre, he owns that acre.
Hmm.
I
That makes
didn't
sense to
really
me.
get that example of noting. I think the better example is the tomato juice example, to it, which I really wish he didn't put in there, because people raise it against me and I can't give an answer because I think it's actually a really challenging example. And I think Nozick, I mean, I know you're interested in getting to the truth in philosophy, but why did you have to stick that example in there?
What's the
Um,
tomato juice example?
if you pour a can of tomato juice, which is your labor, into the sea, made
Mhm.
radioactive so you can see that it's mixed with the sea, do you
Right.
own the whole of the sea, or have you just lost your tomato juice? And the obvious answer is you've lost your tomato juice. But that suggests against the idea that labor mixing ensures that you get whatever you put your labor into. So there needs to be some principle that either limits labor mixing to stop you from owning the whole sea, or some alternative principle, which Nozick, of course, doesn't provide. And I must confess, I've got no great answer to it.
Yes, it is hard to articulate a principle, but I think there are clear cases. I think if you go to the uninhabited land and you plow the land, if you plow an acre, you own that acre very
Yeah,
clearly.
yeah,
And
I
if
agree.
you're Christopher Columbus and you plant a flag and say you own the whole new world, you definitely don't own the whole new world. That's another
Yeah,
clear example.
yeah, I think you're right about that. Um, and I suppose we can go from those examples and keep on giving our examples that are sort of by the side of each to hopefully get a principle that's plausible in the middle.
Hmm.
That would be my ambition anyway.
Another case of dispute is with Israel versus Palestine. What do you think about that?
I don't think about that, to be quite
Don't think
honest.
about it. Yeah.
It's one of the few controversial topics on which I just don't take a view, in part because I don't know all the history and stuff like that. And I don't think it's the type of thing you can do from the armchair. I think you really do need to go through the history books and then have a theory of homesteading too. And although I'm willing to contemplate the theory of homesteading, I don't want to go through all the history books.
Hmm.
Uh, I, I don't think there's any moral obligation on my part to figure out what justice demands in the real world. So in this instance, I'm just going to go, I'm just not too interested. Um, I'm afraid.
Well, Israel is the most recent case, or well, not the most recent case. It's one of the most recent cases of one tribe going in and taking land by force and kicking out the people who live there.
Hmm.
Since then, there have been other cases like what Azerbaijan just did in Nagorno-Karabakh to the Armenians.
Well, if what you've described there is right, then the Israelis are obviously wrong in claiming the land. It's not theirs.
Well, you'd think so, but I think there's a catch. So at the same time, when the Israelis went and kicked out the Palestinians, Jews in the surrounding Arab countries were kicked out and all their property was stolen, and nearly all of those Jews fled to Israel. And so I think it was roughly 700,000 Arabs were expelled from what is now Israel, and roughly 700,000 Jews were kicked out of their homes in North Africa and the Arab countries and Persia. And so I think there is an argument that if there's a roughly equal exchange of refugees, then it tends to legitimize the status quo ceasefire line.
Maybe I really wouldn't know.
Mhm.
Um, and whenever I comment on these, I always just assume what the person has told me is true, and then go, assuming that to be the case, then this is my verdict. On that question, though, I wouldn't even know the answer because I wouldn't. I'd have to think through the principle of rectification and homestead theory too, and I'm not really too sure about those, so I don't know what
Mhm.
to say there.
My view is that the 1948 claims were legitimate because there was a roughly equal exchange of refugees. But since then, Israel has continued to expand and take more land, and I think the 1967 settlements were not legitimate. But let's go
Okay.
back to the hunter-gatherers example.
Mm.
In America, what happened in a lot of cases was that there were hunter-gatherer Amerindians who were forced off of a lot of their hunting grounds, but they were given a reservation. Some of their hunting grounds were turned into a reservation, and they had the
Yeah.
opportunity to become agriculturalists on that smaller area.
Yeah.
I think that's fine if it's actually if the product actually matches what is promised. They have to, of course, actually be able to have the reservation, and I don't think the reservation should be the worst quality land. It has to be
Yeah.
the same average quality as all the other land. And
Yeah.
then so there were these groups called the Five Civilized Tribes, which included, I don't know, I think the Crow tribe and the Cherokee tribe and some others who actually did become agriculturalists, and um, they had successful societies on the reservation land. But then there was a populist politician named Andrew Jackson who became president and just kicked them all out of their homes and gave the land to white settlers who had voted for him. So I would say that the initial reservation system there was a legitimate instance of property rights, but then it was violated later by Jackson.
Hmm. I was reading a book recently called The Not So Wild Wild West by Anderson and Hill, and they were saying in that until about 1850, Indian property rights were on the whole respected by the white man, and it's only after the establishment of the standing army in the USA after the Civil War,
Let me look up when
they needed
Jackson
to find
was.
something to do, that you had these great wars with the Red Indians, or the Native Americans, as people would prefer me to call them.
Andrew
And
Jackson was president from 1929 to 1937, so that's a little bit before 1850, but same general time period.
1829 to 1830. Okay, yeah, so that would be an instance of, you know, some mischief going on before the Civil War. Unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you about what kind of libertarian are you, and why? Because you seem to be a mix between a conservative and a libertarian from what I've seen. If this isn't putting the conversation on a different
No,
track,
that's fine.
you're in charge of it.
What type of libertarian am I? I'm not sure what all the different types are called. I used to be a very strong anarcho-capitalist,
Yeah.
but I shifted my thinking a bit because we're not realistically going to achieve anarcho-capitalism anytime soon. And I think that anarcho-capitalism has the defect of not having an answer to the question of who owns the government property. So, for example, in Russia, after the Soviet Union fell, basically all of the Soviet government's property became the property of these well-connected gangster oligarchs.
Yeah.
That seems clearly wrong. I think clearly the citizens of the Soviet Union are the rightful owners of that property.
Hmm. Okay. I mean, that I am an anarcho-capitalist, and have been for a number of years. And I think the theory of rectification is one of the least looked into. I'd agree with you on that. Nozick just gestures to it a bit. And Rothbard in his Ethics of Liberty does a bit more. I think he has a chapter on it, but it's not as developed as one would want. Although there is some woman, along with David Gordon, that published a book recently on historic injustice. Nanja something. Your readers might
Nanja
know.
something? I don't know the name.
Yeah, neither do I. I just know it's a black woman and David Gordon who published this book. She came and spoke at the Oxford University Mises Society last year.
Oh, does she have an African last name when she talks about colonialism?
Yes.
Okay, I know. I don't know. I don't remember her name, but I know who you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. She's done some work on this,
Hmm.
so she'd probably be the best person to talk to when it comes to all of these issues.
Well, we talked about the settlement of North America. We talked about Israel. What do you think? Here's another land ownership question. I think we would agree that if you are a squatter, like if your neighbor has a home that he's renting out, but it's like vacant for a year, if you go and squat in the home, that's not legitimate.
Yeah, agree.
However, if the what if there was like a baron who had this land in his family for centuries, and maybe they acquired it through some kind of dubious cutting people's heads off adventure, but he's had it for centuries, and he also has these hunting grounds, but the baron's really lazy and no one's used the hunting grounds in a generation. Do you then have the right to homestead the hunting grounds? Can you go into the hunting grounds and chop down some trees and make a cabin for yourself?
Uh, I err towards saying no. Once the rights are established there with the owner until he gives them back.
Does
Yeah,
it make a difference if it's hunting grounds rather than some abandoned houses?
I'd say it's the same for both hunting grounds and abandoned houses. Although when you say abandoned houses, it's important to distinguish between a proper abandonment, which is like I relinquish my title to this house and it is now open for homesteading, and simply I'm not using it, but I'm maintaining my ownership of it, or I'm maintaining my ownership claim. I think the latter is obviously, or not obviously, but I think you still have a claim to the house in the latter case, but in the former case, I think, well, it's obviously open to homesteading. You can give something back to the state of nature, for want of a better term.
But why would anyone give it back to the state of nature? If you have the option to just retain the property right over it, why would you ever relinquish the property right?
Um, well, you might enjoy people making use of it, There must be instances where you've had something and you don't enjoy it, or you just are indifferent. Somebody says, "Can I have that?" And you go, "Oh yeah, sure. I'm actually I don't care whether or not I have it or not." And I think that would be the case with some property.
I certainly see why you would give it to a friend, but it seems like I have a hard time imagining that someone would just give it to back to the state of nature. Yeah, it seems like
I mean,
almost everyone, if they were going
keeps
to give it away, they would find a friend to give it to.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's more likely than just giving it back to the world to homestead. But there might be some people out there that do that. There might be some libertarians in the future of Ancapistan who think, well, it might actually be a good thing that property ownership is dispersed to a greater extent than may be the case in that society. I certainly think land ownership is important for the pursuit of the good life, because it gives people a fallback position that's much stronger than one where they don't have any land at all.
Right.
Certainly, I look forward to getting my hands on a small plot of land and trying to do something with it. Of course, in the UK, we have all these planning permission regulations such that you can do almost nothing with it. But if you get it in a wood that's deep enough and nobody can see and nobody snitches on you, then you might be able to do something.
Right. I'm inclined to say that I think homesteading the lazy barons hunting grounds might be okay.
Okay.
I think that it would not be okay to homestead on someone's ranch because even if the rancher is lazy, his cattle are like they do need the whole area to graze over at
Yeah.
least occasionally. So I don't think you can homestead on the ranch. But if it's really just a hunting ground that nobody has used in a long time, maybe you can build a homestead there.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a baron who has this ancestral claim of dubious origin rather than some property right that was more recently acquired.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that dubiousness would certainly undermine his claim compared to the recent
And for the
origins.
same reason, I would say it's not okay to go build a homestead in a national park because the national park is used for tourism. There are people who like, hiking and exploring, and that counts as a use, even if there's no one living there.
Oh, I feel uncomfortable about that.
Oh, wait, you're uncomfortable about
Yeah, I
you're
know.
okay with prohibiting you're okay with prohibiting squatting on the uh hunting grounds of the Baron, but you're uncomfortable with prohibiting homesteading the national park. Is that right?
If the squatting interferes with the hunting in some way, I think the best thing that I can say to all of these questions is go and read my review article of Billy Christmas's book called Property and Justice, A Liberal Theory of Natural Rights, available at the Mises Institute. Charles Amos book review, Property and Justice, a Liberal Theory of Natural Rights, where I deal with all of these awkward problems that Billy Christmas tries to solve. He's now in America, by the way, which I don't think he does correctly. And I think I deal with tourism or something very adjacent to it in that.
I'll check it out. That sounds good. All right, we went over what do you think about Tibet?
Tibet, and is that disputed?
Well, it's disputed between the Tibetans and the Chinese and the Chinese government.
The dispute, as I understand it, though, is over the sovereignty of the area. And since I'm an
Mhm.
anarchist, I would just dismiss the question altogether. I would say let's just look
Well,
at
yes,
who
but the Chinese government also sends in mass migration of Han Chinese to colonize the area.
colonize it through purchasing property and then living there, or just stealing it off the natives.
Well, I think it's purchased. I mean, I don't know if it's the Chinese government. I don't know if they have the option to not sell or not.
Well, I don't have an issue with colonization per se, insofar as it's understood as going into another area and purchasing land and sort of replacing the
Mhm.
domestic population as a proportion of it. If that's all that's being done, then I've no issue. The problem then is sort of if that's financed by the Chinese state and the Chinese state is stolen off the Chinese people, what's the problem there? And again, it's another tricky question of rectification. which libertarians aren't best placed to answer because they haven't sorted that out yet. But
Mhm.
colonization per se, I don't have an issue with. Imperialism is what I have an issue with, which is another state ruling over another set of people via force. So I'm against the British Empire.
I'm pro British Empire. I think that if I think the British Empire just replaced other states. And so if people were going to be dominated by some kind of local warlord or the British Empire, I think it would be better to be the British Empire.
Yeah, and I'm willing to accept that being the case as second best. But if we're talking about an ideal, and of course, if you're talking about second best, then I suppose I would agree with you. But ideally, I just prefer, no government in these areas. But the most liberal government, I think, does have the right to, not right, inverted commas, right, to rule over an area. I don't place much moral weight on the fact that it's the locals ruling themselves.
Right, I agree.
Although I wonder if I would think that if I were being ruled by the French or the Chinese or the Ghanaians, maybe I'd have a different view.
Well, aren't many of the officials now recent immigrants? I think you are in that situation.
Well, certainly in London, the Londoners are under Sadiq Khan, who's some Pakistani or Indian. Um, yeah, and then we have Rishi Sunak, of course. Yeah,
Mhm.
I prefer him though than I prefer Keir Starmer. So I suppose that actually supports my view that yeah, I'd
Right.
support
Yeah, I think that rule
who's
by the
most
local
liberal.
population is, I think the rule by the local population matters if it's very, very local. Like if it's a town of 100 people, it seems like it seems like maybe rule by the local population is preferable in case because then rule by local people is much closer to rule by the actual individual people who are being ruled.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah,
and that
there's no
that
there's no like fundamental principled reason why rule by the local people is better. I support the most libertarian government. I don't like the classically liberal stuff about democracy or parliamentarianism or any of that.
yeah, I don't care about any of that either. When it comes to constitutional questions, I pretty much ask which one's going to get us to libertarianism the quickest and most securely, and
Exactly.
which whatever the answers to that, I favour it. So when it comes to debates about proportional representation or first past the post, I just think, well, whichever one's going to get us quicker to libertarianism, I would favour that one.
What do you think about Russia and Ukraine?
I don't think Russia should have invaded Ukraine. On the basis that government should exist at all. So having one government try and displace another is illegitimate because there shouldn't be any government there at all. And as I understand it, Russia's probably more illiberal, less libertarian than the Ukrainian government.
I think they're about equally unlibertarian, to be honest.
Okay, okay,
Yeah, so my position is I support whatever minimizes warfare. Since I don't think either the Russian or Ukrainian government is legitimate, I support whatever brings the fighting to an end as soon as possible. I do think
yeah,
that Russia was provoked by NATO, so you could say it was arguably a defensive action, but of course I wish that neither the NATO governments nor the Russian government existed.
this is Nigel Farage's argument, and I think it's important in saying that to distinguish between provoked in the sense of it caused it and provoked in the sense of it's blamable in some way. And I think
Mhm.
you're right in saying it provoked Russia in the sense that it helped cause it. Uh, but I don't think it provoked in the sense that it makes it blameworthy. I don't think
I think
wanting to.
NATO is blameworthy. Or are you saying that we should also state that Russia is also blameworthy?
I don't think, assuming the legitimacy of the state for the moment, that a state acquiring help from other people or nuclear deterrence in some way is threatening enough. I don't think it's threatening at all against the other states such that they can invade the state that has
Mhm.
joined that alliance or acquired a nuclear deterrent. So I don't think Ukraine potentially joining NATO is any justification for Russia to invade.
What would you think if I was your next door neighbor and I had a private nuke and I aimed it at your house?
I'd be against that, and I think I could take preemptive action on the basis that the mere fact that you have that private nuclear weapon is risk enough against me that I can preemptively stop you from having it. So I suppose in the previous instance, I'd have to, that I've just spoken about with Russia and Ukraine, assume the legitimacy of nuclear weapons, which I don't think are legitimate. I think they present too much of a risk to war.
So you think that it's it's not morally legitimate to own a nuclear weapon because it's just too inherently dangerous.
Yeah, if you own it on Mars and you're the only person on Mars, then fine. But if you own it
Mhm.
in a country where there's millions of people next to you, yeah, I don't think that's legitimate. I think the risk
Yeah,
is
that
too
makes sense. That
the
makes
risk
sense.
is too great. Although that's another tricky problem, as I keep on saying in this discussion, sort of where do you draw the line on risk? Um, I started my dissertation at undergraduate level on that question, and I quickly, or not quickly, within a couple of months, terms, gave up on it because I thought this is just way too difficult. And pretty much everybody agrees in the philosophical literature that it's an incredibly difficult problem. I think there's one book from a deontological perspective on this problem, which is Imposing Risk by John Obdisky or something like that. And that's it. There's a number of papers, but there's just one book.
Mhm. Well, let's wrap up by discussing Greenland again. So I
Yeah.
think you said that it's with Russia, Ukraine, Russia, it was not okay for Russia to invade because you don't think that the Russian government or the Ukrainian government are legitimate,
Yeah.
and therefore no government may aggress against another government. Is that right?
Yes, the violence that Russia did, sort of that invalidates its claim. I mean, neither of them have
Yeah.
got legitimate claims, and given neither of them have got legitimate claims,
The
and
violence
Russia's
makes
like,
the violence makes Russia's action wrong. It sounds like you're
yeah,
saying. Yeah,
it
I
tips it
agree.
in favor of Ukraine. Yeah.
Um, So suppose that Russia had been able to annex parts of Ukraine by trickery. Like, what if they snuck into the Ukrainian president's office and tied him up and then issued an edict saying that these provinces were part of Russia and somehow nobody noticed and then Russia just acquired them peacefully?
Uh, I mean, maybe that would be fine then.
It's hard to imagine, but it seems much more defensible than starting a war.
Yeah, maybe that would be fine. Certainly, what I've said tips the balance in favor of Ukraine. It's not existent in that example, and provided they were no less liberal, libertarian, to use the American term, then I wouldn't have an issue, I suppose.
Hmm. I think the case with Greenland is like that. I think the American government is more libertarian than the Danish government. And also, uh, almost nobody lives in Greenland. The vast majority of it is uninhabited. So I think that it is justifiable for America to annex it, provided it doesn't start a bloody war.
And what would this annexation involve? I mean, it's 50,000 people, so it's double the population of the place that I live in now, East Grinstead. So we're talking about taking over a town council, basically.
Well, they
I
could still have the
imagine.
town council. The official ownership of Greenland would just transfer to the United States government, which would mean that the United States government would own the real estate, which is all covered in ice, but it would technically be owned by the American government. And more importantly, the American government would have mineral rights and rights to certain Arctic shipping lines.
Um, I mean, neither the Dutch nor the Americans have a
The
legitimate
Danish.
claim on either of those things. So I don't see why it would be so
Mhm.
bad to take it from the Dutch because the Dutch never owned it in the first place.
Right.
And you're not even using it. So you're just making claims over. Yeah, actually, fine. If you're going to go to the north of Greenland and you're going to say these mineral rights are ours, and the Dutch have gone, these mineral rights are ours. Neither of you got a claim on it. So sure, if you want to go and make a ridiculous claim, just like the Dutch had done, then fine. My view would be neither of you should make that claim, but the
But you would
Americans
think that it
would
was okay for,
claim.
it sounds like you think it would be okay for any individual in the world to take their mining equipment up to the north of Greenland and start harvesting uh, lithium or whatever they have up there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
If the Americans were
Agree.
to get in the way, I'd say no. I support the individual. Greenland strikes me as a great frontier for people to go and homestead mineral resources
Yeah.
and create homes. And the quicker the ice melts, the quicker those opportunities can be realized. And I think that's quite exciting.
Yes.
And I,
The ice
I
melting is also part of why some of those Arctic shipping lines are opening up.
oh, okay, yeah,
Yeah,
because
because if you think about a globe, you can go from like Europe to Japan
yeah.
through the Arctic islands rather than through the Panama Canal, and it's quite a bit shorter.
Hmm, hmm. Yeah, good. I look forward to seeing that happen. And maybe if the American government were to protect the homesteaders to a greater extent than the Dutch government, then there's a
Mhm.
case where the American government
Danish
has,
government.
yeah, sorry, yeah, the Danish government, not the Dutch, from maybe there's a case for them doing protection or like having some kind of jurisdiction over it in the sort of fourth, fifth best world, of course.
Hmm. That's my view as well.
Okay.
Well, we're in agreement. We resolved the Greenland question.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there was really any great debate over it to begin with. It's unhomestead, neither have legitimate claims, so there.
All right. Well, this was a great conversation. I will put it up on my Substack if that's all right with you.
That's fine. That's fine. I look forward to